The WNBA is currently navigating a significant financial contradiction.
She's basically saying, hey, somebody's gonna have to fold and it ain't gonna be us. The players union proposal would allegedly result in projected losses of $460 million, calling out the WNBA owners to a standoff for these CBA negotiations. This is the nasty rhetoric.
While the league reports record attendance and a 500% increase in jersey sales, it remains weeks away from a potential cancellation of the 2026 season. Internal negotiations have reached a critical point as the league faces a projected $460 million deficit, leading stakeholders to question whether the current business model is sustainable. The conflict centers on a projected $460 million loss the WNBA claims it will incur if it meets the current demands of the Players Association. The union is seeking 27.5% of gross revenue. While NBA players receive 50%, the WNBA has historically operated at a deficit, relying on subsidies from the NBA for nearly 30 years to remain operational. Players are now seeking a share of top-line revenue before operational costs, including travel and facilities, are deducted. Ownership, composed of veteran business executives, maintains that such a transition is financially impossible while the league continues to lose money. This labor dispute is complicated by potential conflicts of interest within the union. Nafisa Collier, a star for the Minnesota Lynx and a high-ranking official in the Players Association, has stated that the players will not be the ones to concede. Collier is also the co-founder of Unrivaled, a private equity-funded 3-on-3 league. Analysts suggest that if the WNBA 2026 season is lost to a lockout, the talent and sponsorship interest could shift directly to Collier's league. This dynamic has led some to question if the union's leadership is incentivized to prioritize alternative platforms over the WNBA's long-term stability. Addressing the economic disparity, former Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban has proposed a fundamental shift in how the league compensates its players. Currently, top college athletes often take a significant pay cut upon entering the professional ranks. Due to name, image, and likeness, or NIL, deals, stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese earn seven-figure incomes in college, while the base salary for a top WNBA draft pick is approximately $78,000. Cuban argues that the teams do not have the margins to significantly raise salaries under the current structure. His proposed solution involves allowing local corporations to pay players directly through sponsorship packages brokered by the teams, effectively bypassing the salary cap. This model would allow a franchise to facilitate multi-million-dollar deals for stars without those costs hitting the team's internal books. To prevent a competitive imbalance between large and small markets, Cuban suggests a centralized revenue-sharing pool, where a portion of these local deals is redistributed across the league. However, gaining consensus among owners to share private corporate relationships remains a significant hurdle. The recent surge in revenue is largely attributed to the arrival of Caitlin Clark. Before 2024, the WNBA struggled with ticket sales in several markets. Now teams are frequently selling out NBA-sized arenas. The Players Association is attempting to leverage this growth into long-term guaranteed contracts for all players. Owners remain hesitant, questioning if this shift represents a permanent change in the market or a temporary trend. Committing to $500 million in new debt based on a single year of growth could lead to a total collapse if interest wanes. The league is now approaching a deadline. The 2026 season is scheduled to begin on May 8th, with training camps set for April. Before the season can start, the league must oversee expansion drafts for Toronto and Portland and manage a free agency period. These milestones are currently stalled by the threat of a strike or lockout. The rhetoric between both sides has intensified, risking the alienation of the new fan base that drove the recent growth. If a resolution is not reached by May, the momentum established by the current generation of stars may be lost. The coming weeks will determine if the WNBA can establish a new financial foundation or if the business will fail to keep pace with its own visibility. Either the league adopts a radical restructuring of its finances or it faces a total operational shutdown. The current media rights agreement, valued at approximately $2.2 billion over 11 years, is often cited as the league's financial salvation, yet the structure of this deal reveals a more complex reality. An annual average of $200 million is a significant increase from previous cycles, but the infusion of cash is backloaded, meaning the largest payments do not arrive until later in the decade. For a league currently reporting a $460 million deficit, this creates a liquidity crisis. The immediate operational costs of a modern professional league are outstripping the current cash flow. Owners are being asked to fund the gap out of pocket while players demand a share of the projected future revenue today. This disconnect between current debt and future earnings is the primary driver of the current deadlock. If the league commits to a high revenue-sharing percentage now, it risks insolvency before the most lucrative years of the media deal even begin. One of the most significant new expenses is the league-wide transition to charter flights, a move that cost the WNBA an estimated $25 million in 2024 alone. While this was a necessary step for player health and safety, it added a permanent 8-figure line item to a budget that was already in the red. Previously, the league's reliance on commercial travel was a symbol of its subsidized status under the NBA. Now that the WNBA is attempting to stand as an independent commercial entity, these major league amenities are expected, yet the revenue to support them is still catching up to the public perception of the league's success. The Players Association views these improvements as long overdue basic requirements, while ownership views them as a massive investment that further delays the league's path to profitability. The expansion of the league adds another layer of financial risk. The addition of the Golden State Valkyries, followed by franchises in Toronto and Portland, is intended to capitalize on the current momentum. While these new teams pay significant expansion fees, reportedly reaching $50 million in some cases, those funds are typically distributed among the existing owners to offset their losses. However, the cost of scaling the league's central infrastructure to support 14 or 15 teams instead of 12 is substantial. New practice facilities, expanded front offices, and increased marketing spends in new international markets like Toronto require capital that the league is currently borrowing against its future. If the 2026 season is lost to a lockout, the momentum in these new markets could vanish before a single game is played, turning these expansion investments into massive liabilities. The prioritization clause in the current collective bargaining agreement remains one of the most contentious points of negotiation. Historically, WNBA players spent their winters playing in high-paying leagues in Russia, Turkey, and China to supplement their domestic salaries. The prioritization rule changed this by requiring players to return from overseas and report to WNBA training camps on time or face stiff penalties, including season-long suspensions. This was designed to protect the WNBA's brand and ensure its stars were available for marketing and opening day. However, it effectively cut off the primary source of income for many players without providing a domestic salary increase to bridge the gap. For the players, the current demand for 27.5% of gross revenue is not just about wealth, it is about making the WNBA a full-time, year-round career that no longer requires international moonlighting. This shift in the global basketball economy has created an opening for domestic competitors. The Unrivaled League, a 3-on-3 format launching in early 2025, offers players equity stakes and salaries that rival or exceed WNBA minimums for a fraction of the time commitment. By offering an ownership model, Unrivaled is doing what the WNBA has so far refused to do, giving the players a direct piece of the business. This puts the WNBA in a defensive position. If the WNBA enters a lockout in 2026, Unrivaled could theoretically expand its schedule or its roster, providing the top 30 players in the world with a viable alternative to the traditional league structure. The risk for the WNBA is a permanent brain drain, where its most marketable stars realize they can earn more and exert more control in a private equity-funded startup than in a legacy league controlled by the NBA's Board of Governors. The internal politics of the WNBA Board of Governors also reflect a growing divide. There are the legacy owners who have been with the league for decades and view the WNBA as a community asset that requires careful, slow growth to avoid the bankruptcies that claimed previous women's leagues like the ABL. Then there are the growth investors, such as the owners of the New York Liberty and Las Vegas Aces, who have spent millions on private facilities and high-end staffing, treating the WNBA like a high-growth tech startup. These newer owners are often more willing to spend aggressively to capture the market, but they are frequently at odds with the more conservative owners who are wary of the $460 million deficit. The Players Association is attempting to exploit this rift, knowing that some owners are more desperate to keep the games running than others. The technical definition of gross revenue is the pivot point for the entire 2026 season. In the NBA, the 50-50 split is based on basketball-related income, or BRI, which is a meticulously audited figure that includes everything from jersey sales to parking fees. The WNBA's current proposal is more opaque. The players want a percentage of every dollar that comes in, regardless of the league's expenses. The owners argue that because the WNBA is still a growth business, they must be allowed to reinvest revenue back into the league before sharing it with the players. They contend that if they give 27.5% of the top-line revenue to the players, there will be no money left to pay for the arenas, the coaches, or the marketing teams that generate that revenue in the first place. It is a fundamental disagreement over whether the WNBA should be treated as a mature business or a developing venture. The impact on the upcoming draft classes cannot be overstated. The 2025 and 2026 classes include stars who have already built massive personal brands through NIL deals in college. These players are increasingly savvy about their market value. If the WNBA cannot offer a financial package that exceeds what they earn in the NCAA, the league faces the prospect of its top prospects staying in school for an extra year or seeking alternative professional paths. This would dilute the talent pool and potentially kill the Caitlin Clark effect before it has a chance to stabilize. The league is currently relying on the prestige of the WNBA brand to attract talent, but in an era of direct-to-consumer athlete branding, prestige is becoming a less effective recruitment tool than cold hard cash. Mark Cuban's suggestion of an NIL-style professional model would require a complete overhaul of the league's legal and antitrust framework. Currently, the salary cap is designed to ensure competitive balance, preventing wealthy teams from simply buying every championship. If the league allows local sponsorship packages to pay players directly, the New York Liberty, owned by the multi-billionaire Tsai family, could theoretically facilitate deals for their entire roster that dwarf the salaries of teams in smaller markets like Connecticut or Atlanta. Cuban's solution of a revenue-sharing pool for these local deals is an attempt to mitigate this, but it introduces a bureaucratic nightmare of auditing private corporate contracts to ensure they are fair market value. The legal challenges alone could take years to resolve, time the league does not have as the May 2026 deadline approaches. Furthermore, the league's television ratings present a lagging revenue problem. While viewership has spiked, many of the league's existing sponsorship and local TV deals were signed years ago when the ratings were a fraction of what they are now. This means the WNBA is currently delivering premium audiences to advertisers at discount prices. The league will not be able to renegotiate these contracts for several years. The Players Association, however, is looking at the current Nielsen numbers and demanding a salary structure that reflects those ratings immediately. They are essentially asking for a success premium on money the league hasn't actually collected yet. The role of the NBA in these negotiations is the ultimate wild card. For decades, the NBA has provided a safety net, covering losses and providing the logistical backbone for the WNBA. However, there is growing pressure from some NBA owners to see the WNBA become self-sufficient. They are hesitant to continue subsidizing a league where the players are openly hostile to the ownership group during labor disputes. If the NBA decides to tighten the purse strings, the WNBA's $460 million hole becomes a terminal condition rather than a manageable debt. The players are betting that the NBA is too invested in the optics of women's sports to let the league fail. It is a high-stakes game of chicken, with the future of the sport as the collateral. As free agency approaches for the 2026 season, many players are being advised by their agents to wait. Signing a contract now, under the old CBA rules, could mean missing out on a massive pay increase if a new deal is reached. Conversely, if a lockout occurs, those contracts might be voided or frozen. This has created a frozen market where teams cannot plan their rosters and players cannot plan their lives. The expansion teams in Toronto and Portland are in an even more precarious position, as they are trying to build organizations from scratch in a vacuum of information. They are hiring staff and selling season tickets for a season that may not exist. The rhetoric from the union leadership has focused heavily on the valuation of the teams. They point to the fact that WNBA franchises that were worth $10 million a decade ago are now being valued at $100 million or $200 million. The players argue that this increase in equity value belongs to them as much as the owners, as it was their labor and their popularity that drove the valuation up. The owners counter that equity value is paper wealth and does not pay the bills. Until a team is sold, that value cannot be liquidated to pay player salaries. This represents a clash between labor economics and venture capital logic that is rarely seen in professional sports. The Caitlin Clark stimulus also has a shelf life. While she has brought millions of new eyes to the product, the league must prove it can retain those fans if she is not on the court. A lockout would be disastrous in this regard. New fans are historically less loyal than die-hard fans, If the 2026 season is canceled, they may simply move on to the next trend, leaving the WNBA with its old debt and none of its new momentum. The league's marketing department is currently in a race against time to convert Caitlin Clark fans into WNBA fans, a task that becomes impossible without a schedule of games to promote. In the final analysis, the dispute is about the transition from a subsidized niche league to a mainstream commercial powerhouse. Every major sports league from the NFL to the Premier League has gone through a period of labor strife as it navigated this transition. The difference is that the WNBA is doing it under a microscope, with a projected $500 million loss and a brand new, highly volatile fan base. The numbers provided by the league suggest a cliff is approaching, but the players believe the owners are simply hiding the ladder. Whether the 2026 season begins on time depends on whether both sides can agree on the math before the clock runs out on the most significant era in the history of the sport. The tragedy of the situation is that the very growth that should be celebrating the league is the same force that is currently tearing its business model apart. The legal mechanism driving this confrontation is the opt-out clause in the current collective bargaining agreement, which the Players Association triggered in late 2024. By exercising this right, the union effectively shortened the life of the existing deal, forcing both sides to the table a year earlier than originally planned. The union's gamble is predicated on the belief that the league's current market value will never be higher, and therefore their leverage is at its peak. However, this move also accelerated the timeline for a potential work stoppage. If a new agreement is not ratified by the start of the 2026 season, the previous rules cease to exist, and the league enters a legal vacuum. This has created a sense of urgency that many owners feel is premature, arguing that the league needs more time to realize the actual cash flow from its new media partnerships before committing to a radically different pay structure. The role of sports betting has become a significant yet often overlooked point of contention in these negotiations. As of 2025, the WNBA has integrated sports wagering into its digital platforms and broadcasts, generating a new stream of income that did not exist when the previous CBA was signed. The Players Association contends that this revenue, along with data sharing fees sold to betting operators, should be classified as basketball-related income. The league, conversely, treats these as ancillary services, arguing that the revenue is generated by the technology and the brand partnerships rather than the on-court performance itself. This distinction is worth tens of millions of dollars. For the players, it represents a modern frontier of the sports economy where they feel they are being systematically excluded from the profits of their own likenesses. The technicalities of shared services between the NBA and the WNBA also complicate the transparency of the league's financial health. Because the two leagues share front office resources, legal teams, and marketing departments, the WNBA pays a management fee to the NBA for these services. Union auditors have frequently questioned the fairness of these fees, suggesting that the NBA may be overcharging its sister league to artificially inflate the WNBA's reported losses. The league maintains that without these shared resources, the WNBA's operational costs would be significantly higher, as they would have to build entire departments from scratch. This dispute over accounting practices has eroded trust between the two parties, making it difficult to agree on the base numbers required to build a new financial model. Furthermore, the expansion into international markets like Toronto introduces complex tax and labor law challenges that the league has yet to fully resolve. Operating a franchise in Canada requires compliance with different healthcare mandates, currency fluctuations, and cross-border employment laws. If the league and the union cannot agree on a standard contract that works in both the United States and Canada, the Toronto franchise could be hampered by recruitment disadvantages. Players are wary of losing money to higher Canadian tax rates or being subjected to different disciplinary standards. Without a unified CBA that accounts for these international nuances, the WNBA's global expansion goals could be stalled by litigation before the first tip-off in Toronto. The middle-class player, the veteran who is not a superstar but provides the essential depth for a championship team, is arguably the most at risk in this standoff. While stars like Caitlin Clark have private endorsements to fall back on, the majority of the league's 144 players rely solely on their WNBA salaries. A lockout would not only stop their paychecks, but would also terminate their access to team-provided healthcare and training facilities. The union is fighting for a living wage for the bottom of the roster, arguing that a professional athlete in a billion-dollar league should not have to worry about healthcare during the off-season. The owners, however, point to the $460 million deficit as proof that they cannot yet afford to be a social safety net for every employee, particularly when the business itself is not yet self-sustaining. The Golden State Valkyries, set to begin play in 2025, are being viewed as the blueprint for the future of the league. Owned by Joe Lacob, who also owns the Golden State Warriors, the Valkyries have broken records for season ticket deposits and have an infrastructure that rivals many NBA teams. The success of this franchise has emboldened the union, as it proves that there is a massive appetite for the WNBA when it is backed by world-class investment. However, the Valkyries' success also highlights the growing disparity between the haves and have-nots of the league. Smaller market teams, which do not have the benefit of an NBA-affiliated parent company with deep pockets, view the Valkyries as an outlier that sets unrealistic expectations for the rest of the league. The merchandising infrastructure of the WNBA is another area where the business has failed to keep pace with the hype. In 2024 and 2025, fans frequently reported that jerseys for top players were sold out for months at a time, and the league's retail partners were unable to meet the sudden surge in demand. The union views this as a failure of management, representing millions of dollars in lost revenue that should have been in the shared pool. They argue that the players should not be penalized for the league's inability to forecast demand and manage its supply chain. The owners counter that the explosion in popularity was an unprecedented black swan event, and that building the necessary manufacturing capacity takes years, not months. If the 2026 season is canceled, the damage to the youth basketball pipeline could be permanent. The current surge in WNBA popularity has led to record participation rates in girls' youth leagues and increased investment in high school and collegiate programs. Without this ecosystem relies on the WNBA as the ultimate destination. A protracted labor dispute that takes the stars off the air and out of the arenas would break the connection between the current generation and the next. The Caitlin Clark era has been characterized by a unique cultural moment where young girls see themselves as future professional stars. A lockout risks turning that aspiration into a cautionary tale about the volatility of women's professional sports. Ultimately, the commissioner's office is caught in a vice between the NBA's Board of Governors and the most militant players' association in the league's history. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert has the task of convincing the players that the league is growing, while simultaneously convincing the owners that the league is still a fragile investment that requires restraint. While Leibignayan Autoloys, why Saboltaman the requires restraint? The players see the billions in media rights and the sold-out crowds and demand their share of the prosperity. The owners see the $460 million in projected losses and the rising costs of expansion and demand a return to fiscal reality. As the deadline for the 2026 season approaches, the focus is shifting from what is fair to what is possible. Both sides are looking for a face-saving exit that allows the league to capitalize on its current momentum without bankrupting its future. Whether that comes through Mark Cuban's NIL model, a phased-in revenue-sharing plan, or a temporary extension of the current deal, the window for a peaceful resolution is closing. The numbers are clear, the stakes are documented, and the eyes of the sporting world are now on the boardrooms to see if the business can finally live up to the game.